would like to welcome Joseph Seman-Graves, City Planner for the City of Cohoes, to our show today. Joseph has been City Planner for the City of Cohoes since 2019. He is also the Economic Development Project Manager for the Cohoes Industrial Development Agency and is a member of the Board of Directors of the Albany County Land Bank Corporation. Prior to his current role, Joseph was a project manager for DH Land Pros and the Seattle Trails Alliance. He has a graduate degree in city, urban, community, and regional planning from the University of Albany, SUNY. Joseph, welcome to Deep Power today.
Thanks for having me, Andrew.
We're excited to have you on. So the city of Cohoes has really set an example of how governments and municipalities should be looking at reducing our carbon footprint with your various efforts to leverage renewable energy sources such as solar and or geothermal. Perhaps you can share with us why the city has been pushing so hard on these efforts recently.
Sure. So a little background. Cohoes is a city of about 18,000 people, 4 square miles at the confluence of the Hudson and Mohawk rivers in upstate New York. Traditionally a low to moderate income city, environmental justice designation, disadvantaged designation by the state. So when I started the position, it was a few months before the current administration. And, we had goals of restoring our historic buildings, doing it in an environmentally friendly and conscious way. And then also kind of reducing our energy costs so we can then reinvest into the, historically disadvantaged communities. So we saw a couple of opportunities. It all really began with our street lighting project. So purchasing our street lights, bonding that money out, our potential savings over 20 years from converting them to LEDs, but using that money as our matching funds so we can pursue grants for renewable energy and historic building preservation, which includes, geothermal technology as well for our historic buildings. We thought this was important not only to save money for the city and the taxpayers, but also to, look at all of our needs and look at a comprehensive manner of how we could address them while making smart economic and environmental decisions.
I think that's interesting. Out of something so simple as streetlights, you've such a big effort that's gotten a lot of news stories, I guess, has come about. And I know you mentioned some grants to be able to do that. How important were state or federal grants in being able to really successfully implement or service those types of projects?
Sure. I mean, they're foundational. As I said, low to moderate income city with a lot of historic needs and a lot of maintenance that's been put off because the money just wasn't there over the past decades, whether it's our buildings, our streets, our pipes, our filtration plant. So we can't bond ourselves out of issues. You have a debt limit, and you, as a municipality, you have to adhere to that. So we needed to look at grants, and the challenge always historically was for us, we didn't have any matching funds. So if you're going to get a grant that's going to cover 80% of a project, where's the 20 coming from? So we looked at our streetlights, as I mentioned, as a potential area of savings. We looked at what other cities that were doing, what other energy service companies were looking at when going into cities, and said, let's do it ourselves. So what we did is, like I said, we bonded $6.5 million, potentially $9 million in savings over 20 years with the street lighting project. And we put $3 million into a fund for our building restoration to go after grants. We put $350 for smart city technology and $750 for parks. Now, with that, we were able to be very aggressive on the grant front, which the city has not been able to do in many decades. And, overall, in the past 2.5 years, we've acquired $25.5 million in state, federal, and philanthropic grants. But specifically, out of that bonded money, we used the first year, we turned $1 million of that bonded money into $7 million in grants. And with that, our projects are so massive. Our city hall alone, 1890s era city hall, 35,000 square feet. I mean, a massive building that needs a new roof, new heating and cooling system, new windows, 330 windows or restored windows. All of these projects are multi-million-dollar projects by themselves. So just for this one building, we've been fortunate to go after grants that are now going to restore our roof at a cost of $2 million. We were able to receive a $1 million grant from the New York State Energy and Research Development Authority to switch out our heating and cooling system for a clean energy system, either electric, geothermal. We're still looking at different options. That's going to actually be, at the end of the day, we're generating the energy from our floating solar array. That's going to be municipally owned, first in the nation. So we're able to look at our buildings in a different light because of another clean energy project, and not just say we're going to be replacing a gas system with a gas system. So we can take that chance, go electric, go geothermal, have the combination of two, and then really kind of see what our options are from there in a new light. So the grants have been foundational, and without them, we couldn't generate attention, energy, or funding for these projects.
I think that was a pretty creative way to leverage bond money into greater grants, and kudos to you and your team for thinking of how to put those pieces together. And as you said, without those grants, you really wouldn't have been able to do that. To at least the extent of the projects that you're undertaking. And I know in the past, when solar was coming out, I really feel, and there's studies that show it, had there not been subsidies and other tax credits and programs, the adoption of solar just wouldn't have happened. And so I know in terms of a city municipality side, it is expensive to be able to install new technology like this. But I think that the reduction of carbon footprint and the forward thinking that you guys have kind of set as an example is pretty heroic, and I know it's important. So within your position of working for a government entity like a city of Cohoes, how do you really see the role of lawmakers, whether that's at a state or federal level, really being able to help progress new alternative energy opportunities for the public?
Sure. I'll use the floating solar as an example, because that touched on state and federal legislation so far. So, we were naive initially, thinking that we could just float solar. I Googled it. It seemed like a technology. Let's try it. Even more naive we were to think that as a municipality we can own and operate it, and there's a lot of reasons for that, and not because we can't handle new infrastructure. I mean, we own many miles of roads, pipes, water filtration plants, buildings. We can maintain infrastructure, but at the federal and state levels, whether it's grant programs, whether it's what is now called direct tax incentives, but prior to that just tax incentives for private entities, or just permitting, it wasn't set up for municipalities to go through the process. One example I'll use is our current review with NYSERDA, New York State Energy Research Development Authority. So they offer incentives through the New York Sun program for solar adoption. One, they don't offer them directly to municipalities. And two, there was nothing that allowed for floating solar to be in that conversation. So, we've been talking with the NYSERDA and our DEC counterparts, the Department of Environmental Conservation, about how we could potentially look at funding avenues or incentivize funding for floating solar. Because to us, it's just another tool in the box. It's not the end-all be-all, but it works for us because we have substation capacity. We don't have a lot of land, but we have this water body, so it made sense. I will say that NYSERDA just posted some of their amendments for incentives to the Public Service Commission yesterday, and included in there is potentially a 13-cent per kilowatt hour incentive for floating solar adoption. That didn't exist 3 years ago. It didn't exist a year ago. So not to say Cohoes was the model for that, but we had a lot of conversations, and currently we are the only project in the hopper in New York State that I'm aware of. So that's going to ultimately, like you're saying, it's going to incentivize further adoption. It's going to make the technology, the engineering cheaper at first. And once it's more widely available, those costs will come down, just like you've seen roof mounted come down over time. Separately, at the federal level, we were championed by Congressman Paul Tonko. There was no grants at the federal level when we started this project for municipalities for solar. Through congressionally directed spending, which are the old earmarks, we were able to not only access grant funding at the federal level, which is first in the nation for solar, especially floating solar, but just a few months ago, Congressman Tonko proposed and was currently adopted what they called the Power Our Reservoirs Act, which is directing federal spending to the Army Corps of Engineers to look at all federal reservoirs to see if it's going to be feasible to adopt floating solar technology on these reservoirs. So, just alone, we have federal and state legislation that's now being proposed and adopted because we just had a project and we had an idea that a lot of people have caught on to. Without those, I don't think the adoption would be as quick, and it wouldn't be nearly as easy for municipalities to get through the process.
And that's amazing. I can't imagine the bureaucratic hurdles you had to jump through to really do what you did. It's exciting to hear that changes have been made because of your efforts. I'm curious in that process. I mean, floating solar is not the traditional form of solar that people are familiar with. So, how much education did you feel like you had to offer local or state officials as you were applying? I mean, that's something that I know is a problem. Oftentimes lobbyists are the only ones that can educate, which sometimes is good or bad, but how much education do you have to do to really help them understand what you're trying to accomplish?
Sure. Well, there's a couple different things there. It's, education on the technology, does it work? Education on, we're putting a system on our water reservoir. So obviously there's a safety factor. There's a concern about potential leaching. So just advising on, the health benefits of doing this as compared to, taking up farmland, trying to just educate the public and municipal leaders. And then the funding, educating on why we would even request funding and why not just go with a private entity? Why not go into a power purchase agreement or a lease agreement? So I will say my colleague, Teresa Bourgeois, who could not make it on today, was, paramount in really bringing a coalition together and educating, federal, local, state officials, as well as the public on all of these matters. What we found is the earlier you could formulate your ideas clearly, even before there's funding involved, before you have, detailed engineering or design, but just the idea, formulate it and then talk to the decision makers early on in the process. That was so important for us. 3 years ago, right when we started this, we briefed the DEC and NYSERDA on our project. And, they were probably like, who are these people? Okay, we'll talk to you in a couple of years when you get some traction. We talked to our Department of Health very early on, and we actually put them in touch with their New Jersey counterpart who permitted one of these floating solar arrays, just to see what kind of questions were being asked, so they could prepare and not just get an application and, not be on the defensive, but be like, what is this project? Who are these people? We wanted to be able to answer some questions proactively. And with that, we actually partnered with the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute and the National Renewable Energy Lab. The reason being, the National Renewable Energy Lab in 2018 did a study saying that if we looked at the 24,000 potentially suitable man-made reservoirs in the U.S. for this technology, floating solar, if utilized, we could produce 10% of the nation's energy. So we took their data, reached out to them, and worked with our local university, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, and actually visualized that data in something we call the Floating Solar Explorer tool. So what that is a tool that not only shows the location of these reservoirs, potential capacity, using NREL's data, but we overlaid economic census data to show where low, moderate income communities could take advantage of this technology if offered the same grants that we will receive. We use that not only locally, but the federal government, Congressman Paul Tonko, used that to get legislation passed. So, we used it to educate him, then he took that tool and educated more people. And this is one of the few issues that, didn't seem to, stick to political lines, because you have reservoirs in every state of the country, every district that could utilize them has low to moderate income census data. And it's really just, it's paramount to educate, but also educate in a way that's, someone could take that and then educate someone else. And it's not just a one stop.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad to hear you really took a data-driven approach in terms of the education. It wasn't just, hey, this is a good idea and this is how much it will cost, but it sounds like you really did your research, and with that data, were able to put together that proposal and that help, really educate. So I'm happy to hear you followed that kind of path. In the process of determining vendors or technology, I'm curious, usually like a city or a government entity has to do like an RFP process. Do you feel like that was enough, or that process was sufficient to find the right partner that could help?
Yeah, so that's twofold. You have the engineering and design, and then actually the construction. So New York is not a design build state in the sense that we can't have the same company design something and build it, which in this arena is kind of a challenge, because a lot of the companies that design this kind of technology also have the construction crews that come in that know how to do it behind them. So what we did for the design, we actually reached out to the Sayreville, New Jersey project, engineer of record, and got an idea from the locality who they were using, what kind of materials they were using, and we ended up calling vendors, not knowing anything at this time. We're calling vendors that have floats, that have panels. Like, who do you guys use for engineering and design? Like, who buys from you? Who was the main player here? And we kept coming back to Retu Engineering, which is out of Pennsylvania. To my knowledge, they've designed and built the most amount of floating solar in the United States, which compared to other countries is not, it's a speck on the radar, but there's not a lot to pull from. And we wanted an entity that had experience doing it on our side, especially when it's going to be the first of its kind permitted in New York State. So, we talked with them. We met them actually in New Jersey several times at different sites. And the knowledge that we had was, it was amazing what was coming from them. And we felt confident proceeding with them for the engineering design. The tricky part is bidding out the actual construction work, because whether it's our utility who's, permitting the interconnection process, or the Department of Health or the DEC, they want to know exactly what we're using, like what panel's going on the water. And through a bidding process, we can spec a panel, but we can't say you have to use this and nothing else. So, getting back to your education question, it's also been educating the departments on not only our process, but how they should potentially look at other municipalities who want to own their own energy infrastructure, because there's a municipal process built into New York State's law that we have to follow, and it might not currently align with how they've been permitting private development. So that's been a little bit more, I'm not going to say challenging, but it's been, a learning opportunity for everyone. And we're almost through that. And I think the final product is not only going to be, something that's been reviewed by all these different entities and, given the thumbs up, but it's something that is hopefully going to be used as a model, because, these agencies haven't seen a bidding process for this kind of technology yet. So we're still getting through that part of it. It's taken a little while, but it's been interesting because there is no one path that's been kind of forged for this yet. If that makes sense.
Oh, it totally does. And I think you had mentioned multiple different agencies, state, local or federal, as part of the process to get this approved. For most people, that could be pretty daunting, right? That could be pretty overwhelming to have to navigate all the different people and agencies and approvals and laws and codes. What would you say to any counterpart that might be watching, if they're undertaking a potential project like this? I mean, what advice, what encouragement do you provide, as there might just see lots of hurdles?
Sure. I mean, if you're doing the first of anything in a state, especially if it's on a drinking water reservoir, there's going to be a lot of hurdles. We combine that with, we're also receiving federal grants. So we have federal agencies looking at the granting funds that are coming into us. We have state agencies that are permitting the actual array. And then, we have our municipal system, which it's always has its own hurdles and challenges to navigate. My advice, if you like the work, it's a fun thing. If you're doing the first of anything, there's always going to be a ton of work, a lot of headaches, but if you can get through the other side, there is some reward of just saying that I did it. However, if that's not your cup of tea, in the municipal game, it's, especially when we're working with grants and new stuff, you really have to be willing to take on a lot of unknowns, because at the same time where this is new for you to do, the state agencies don't know the technology yet. So they're going to ask a lot more questions than you might see on other projects. The federal government didn't have grants for this before, so you're getting more questions than you normally would. You have to also understand that it's just a learning curve. So if you want to be at the forefront of something, whether you meant to be or not, you also have a responsibility to some degree to make it a little bit easier for the person behind you and not make it harder. So that's kind of the approach that Cohoes has taken. We want it to be, we would love for it to be a fluid, easy process, but it's not going to be. Life isn't like that. But hopefully for the next person, if you really believe in the project or the technology, hopefully the next person has a little bit easier of a time getting through. And that might be, in itself, motivation to some people. But I would also say try to do this with the team. Don't try to do something like this by yourself. Have someone who's good with communications, have someone who's a good project manager, have someone who's a good grant admin in place beforehand, and don't go into something blind and then try to backtrack and figure out who's doing what. So if you have a good team in place, that makes a world of difference too.
I think that's very wise counsel and great encouragement for anyone else trying to undertake something similar. For those that want to follow the progress, I know they can go look at local news. Do you have any updates on your website, or obviously a Google search of City of Cohoes will show a lot of this? Is there any place people can go to see kind of the progress?
Yeah, so we have on our website, cityofcohoes.com, we have a whole solar page, floating solar page. We update that, whenever there's a new event that happened or a new milestone, we'll put it right on there. But otherwise, we are fortunate to also be working with federal and state agencies. So whether it's the city's social media page or my personal page, or Teresa Bourgeois, director of operations, her page, we try to educate and put information out there as frequently as possible without inundating people over and over with the same project.
Yeah.
So follow us, follow the city, and then check in regularly, and I'm sure you'll see some news.
That's wonderful. Well, I really appreciate your time, Joseph, and your perspective. As I've spoken with a lot of people, they're usually from the private sector. And as a government representative, I think it's very important to hear your story and what you're trying to do. And I think what you're doing for your city and your state is commendable. You've really set a great example of, I think, what local municipalities should be trying to do in reducing their carbon footprint. We really do look forward to watching you guys into the future, seeing the progress and the updates, and then once it's installed and the reports of how it's benefited your city and your residents. So we look forward to staying in touch and watching your progress, and appreciate your time today.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the opportunity, Andrew. I look forward to keeping in touch.
Wonderful.